And we are go. All systems locked and loaded, and like that. It's all good. Okay, so here I am. I had a moment of panic there when I accidentally did something, and I thought it had signed me off, and we were going to have to start all over again from scratch, like we haven't. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. It wasn't a big deal after all. So hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may happen to be watching this. I'm Tad. I'm going to read from Otherland. And what else am I going to do? I'm going to, no, I'm not going to dance. I'm not going to juggle. I'm not going to sing, so you can sit back down again. I know you were jumping up to adjust the volume down. No, what I'm going to do is I am going to tell you there's not much to tell you. Obviously, many of us, most of us are kind of in shock about things going on in the world, but I've tried to keep this politics free. So while the invasion of Ukraine is a pretty horrendous thing, we're not going to talk about it because there's plenty of other places to talk about it. And the pandemic is still on, but it's beginning to decrease in threat somewhat, which is good thing, which is good news. And so we are all still staying healthy here. And what else is there to tell? Not a huge lot. My mom just had a birthday, so I was able to go see her and my dad a few days ago, which was grand. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Not just the usual, just working. I'm currently doing the not the copy edited proofs, but the post, what's the word I'm looking for? The typeset proofs. Thank you. Hello. Senility is not set in, but it does occasionally pop up. The typeset proofs for Into the Narrow Dark. So I'm working on Navigator's Children, which is volume 4, but I'm also at the same time I'm trying to do the actual proofs for volume 3, Into the Narrow Dark, which I explained to the group that I was reading for last night, most of whom are different than you guys, that the whole proof thing, there's really many stages of the whole thing, and you send your first draft in, you get editorial comments, and you hear from your readers. And then you rewrite and you send that final thing in, and then it goes to copy editor. And the copy editor, in my case, Mary Lou Capes Platt, who does a wonderful job, the copy editor then goes through the manuscript and not only fixes copy, which is, the obvious things like correcting errors of syntax or whatever, but also asks questions and says, I don't get this, or this seems long and unnecessarily wordy. Would you like to maybe compact this a bit, and things like that. And then when that phase has been sent back to the writer, in this case me. I go through that and almost always take most of the suggestions. And because people who are doing that, and especially Mary Lou, know what they're doing, and it's a very useful thing to have as a kind of feedback mechanism. And also because, in my case, my copy editor is not a regular reader of science fiction and fantasy for fun. She is more likely to say, "I don't get this. What does this mean? Or why? Is this something mentioned in an earlier book?" And that's actually really important stuff, because otherwise, if you're not careful, you can get to kind of, up your own fundament in terms of, expecting everybody's read and remembered everything, and, that they're going to instantly be able to put plot lines together or remember obscure characters from earlier volumes, or even, series that you wrote 25 years ago or whatever. So then you send those back in with those corrections made and agreed to, and whatever else you have to do, and then they get typeset. And it used to be actual type being set in actual printing presses, like you see in the old-fashioned newspapers, where they're putting the lead type in and they're pounding them down to make them nice and flat with these big wooden mallet things. And it doesn't work that way anymore, obviously, although when I first got into the field, it was, I think, still happening that way. But then a lot of things were still happening in the old-fashioned way. We mostly communicated by telegraph and occasionally Pony Express when I first got into the medium. But anyway, so you get the typeset proofs, which are now done, obviously, on computer. And the typeset proofs come to you, and it's what the book will look like minus the covers, basically. And so that's what I have at the moment, and that's what I'm going through. And there's actually, not only is there the fact that things drop out or get incorrectly transposed before when the typesetting process is happening, but also because it looks different. It looks different when it's in its final typeset form. And you see things that you wouldn't see when it's still just a regular manuscript in whatever word processing format that you've sent it off in. So you see suddenly like, oh, okay, that we go through that whole page and then there's one line left on the next page. So that's not really necessary. Let's see if we can compact that a little bit and pull that line back up to end the chapter, so the reader isn't turning the page to just one single sentence or whatever. There's all kinds of things like that. Or the indentations are wrong, and something that's supposed to be dialogue is indented too far, and it looks like it's the recitation of a poem or a story or something. There's all kinds of issues like that. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. And of course, still doing Navigator's Children. The good thing about Navigator's Children is I think I've finally solved the issues that were troubling me from the draft that I'd written before I had to go back and finish the preparation of Into the Narrow Dark. So I had a lot of things that were written or they were figured out, but I wasn't totally happy about them. And what that means from a reader's point of view is that things that you see that you kind of go, well, I'm not sure I really believe that it would happen that way, but I'm willing to let it go. I hate things like that. I don't want the readers pulled out of the story by something unlikely happening or something happening that's too convenient. Now, that said, of course, when you're writing fiction, I mean, this is the whole point of fiction, that unlike what we know for certain about everyday life, fiction we know has an author. There is somebody, there is an intelligence, at least, or a semi-intelligence in my case, on the far side of that process that is ordering things. So that being the case, obviously fiction thrives off of things like coincidence and dramatic irony. I remember my 7th grade teacher hammering dramatic irony into our heads. I think we were reading Evangeline by Longfellow, and it's this thing about this ancient poem about somebody searching for their lost love in the bayous of Louisiana, as I recall. Now, it's been a long time since I was in seventh grade, and they're constantly, one of them's going up one canal and another one's coming down the other canal, but they're shielded from each other by trees or something, and they never see each other, even though they're within shouting distance, and they've been looking for each other for years. That's dramatic irony. That's when juxtapositions are made that the reader will realize are ironic, or dramatic, or both, but the characters do not. So of course there is that kind of manipulation in fiction all the time. But the thing is if you see it, or if you notice it, or if you say, I find that hard to swallow, even though if the rest of the story is good, most readers will kind of just shrug and move on. But I hate making readers shrug and move on. Now, that is not to suggest that I think I'm never guilty of it. Obviously, readers come in all kinds of flavors, and some are super alert and, really looking for things like that. But in general, if it's bothering me, I don't want to leave it in the manuscript. So that's what I've been doing with Navigator's Children. It's particularly important when you're bringing together a whole slew of story ideas, and they're all going to crash together to bring you to the climax of the story and some kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Eucatastrophe. Well, first catastrophe, then eucatastrophe, which is the opposite of catastrophe. So it's, obviously there are a lot of things that are going to be, in some senses, kind of, fortunate or coincidental or dramatically ironic, but for instance, obviously in the Iliad, where I think it's in the Iliad, but it's certainly part of the Iliad larger story, where Paris happens to shoot Achilles in the heel, and his heel is the one place that his mother, the nymph Thetis, was holding him, or goddess or whatever she is. She was holding him as she dipped him, into the magical river Styx or whatever it was. It's been a while. So the fact that Paris just happens to shoot him in the heel is, a form of dramatic irony, because he could have shot him anywhere else and it wouldn't have hurt him. But the heel, apparently, it was fatal, which really makes you wonder. But then, Homer was doing the best that he could with what he had, and I do the same. So anyway, so that's what I've been doing a lot of while working on the narrow dark copy editor proofs and now the typeset proofs. So I think that's that in terms of just letting you know what's going on with me. Otherwise, everything pretty normal. Kids are well, Deb's well, dogs and cat well, snake, as far as I know, well, although I almost never see the snake, so I just have to take the young people's word. I say, and how is Irwin? Because Irwin's full name is Steve Irwin the Crocodile Hunter, even though she's female. That's still her full name, Steve Irwin the Crocodile Hunter. I say, how's Irwin? And they'll go, oh, she's okay. She's not eating much, but that's just because of such and such or whatever. So I'm, for all I know, that snake could have run away from home 2 years ago, and I wouldn't even know any better. But, so everybody, as far as I know, even including the reptile portion of the house population, are fine. So I'm going to say hello to the people who are here, and then I'm going to read. So, Carl, first off, good evening, and good to see you too. Kelly, hello, hello. The family and I are doing very fine, thank you. Under the circumstances, we, like everybody, we've got worries and frets and horrors and all the things you have in the modern world. 21st century has been an interesting one so far, but basically we're well. So, Emily, hello, good to see you. Claudia, hello, hello, good to see you too. Barban, good evening, a pleasure. Kristen, hello, hello. Heather, hello, good to see you. Winter, hello, Winter is waving hello from the quarantine household. Just the teenager has the dreaded you-know-what with Winter and hubby testing negative. Oh, excellent. Fingers crossed. And hope that your teenager doesn't get it too badly, that it's, a lesser version, and et cetera, et cetera. So fingers crossed. Tim, hello. Good to see you. Chris, hello, Chris. Oh, you're up in Ashland. I love Ashland. We had a couple of really nice family vacations up there. Chris is one of my old high school cronies. We went to Palo Alto High School back in the late 19th century, I believe it was. But anyway, Chris, good to see you. Jim, hey, good to see you too. And Ray, hello, greetings. James D. Scott, tuning in from the Art Gallery of New South Wales, which Calliope visits in Otherland. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get... I don't think Calliope shows up in the first volume, although she's one of my favorite characters. And I got one of the best email... not pre-email, it was a written letter. One of the best letters I ever got from a reader came on the subject of Calliope. Well, I'll tell you very quickly, and then we'll finish saying hello, and then we'll read. I got this letter. Calliope Skoros is a character in Otherland, and those of you who haven't read the books may be interested to know that she's Australian. She is of Greek extraction. She's gay, and she's a police detective. And she was a really fun character to write because she kicks ass. I mean, I just really liked writing her. Anyway, I got this somewhere back in the late 90s or the early 2000s. I got this letter from a reader that said, I often don't feel like I am represented in the books I read, especially science fiction and fantasy. But since I am, but Calliope Skoros really spoke to me because I too am a Greco-Australian lesbian police detective. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. So anyway, that's what James is referring to in terms of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, which is a place that Calliope goes in the course of tracking Dread. And again, if you know the story, you know all about that and how it turns out. And if you don't, well, I'm only reading the first volume, so the rest of it is your homework assignment. Anyway, Steve, checking in from Seattle. Good to see you. Jeremy, hello. Good evening. As always, a pleasure. Ray says it stopped being a pandemic like 6-9 months ago. I think so in some ways, although the Omicron variant scared the heck out of a lot of us. Again, I have a slightly different situation than some people, although I'm sure there are others even here tonight who are in the same situation, which is that one of our kids is particularly at risk to any kind of cardiopulmonary illnesses. So as a result, we've been even more careful than a lot of people. And when the Omicron thing came along, after everybody had had their shots, their first boosters, their first shots and then their boosters, we were going, oh my God, are we going to have to go through all of this again? And we definitely kind of kept lockdown going on, which, not going out unless we absolutely needed to, et cetera, which is one of the reasons that I'm slightly mental at the moment because I really don't go out much. But that's okay. And I don't let it keep me inside anymore because, as Ray said, it's not as bad anywhere near as it was last year, obviously. So anyway, Greg, good to see you, Greg. Make inventory count bearable. Hey, that's kind of what I think of myself. I'm the kind of person who can make inventory count bearable for people. And that's thanks enough for me. Chris. Hi, Chris. How are you doing? Good to see you. Mr. Patterson's class. Chris Yenny remembers. Never got all that from Mr. P. Mr. Patterson. That was our 7th grade English teacher. And we had a very cruel nickname for him, which was the old dead tree, because he was one of those very sonorous, I believe is the correct term for the way he spoke. He was he sounded like John Houseman reading the telephone book, if you ever seen that sketch, which I believe was an SCTV sketch. But anyway, it doesn't matter. John Houseman was an actor, a very sonorous actor who was in things like The Paper Chase and stuff like that. And Mr. Patterson was like that. And he was always, you got the feeling that he really should have been teaching in one of those Pink Floyd's The Wall type English public schools, those, how are you going to get your pudding if you don't eat your meat kind of guys. I mean, not that he was mean or anything, but he was clearly kind of disgusted by us all, and he looked like he'd probably been teaching since the 1910s. Anyway, I wish him nothing but well. I still remember the Evangeline lesson. Anyway, Chris, I'm glad you remember that too. Very good. Becca, hello, good to see you. Cliff, hello, good to see you too. And there is my niece, Joanne. Hello, sweetie, good to see you. Love to you too. And all of the people at your house, including kids and grandkids. James, yes, thank you. I'm very fond of Calliope too. And Winter, 45% of your kids' school were out last week. Wow. Yeah, I know that there's like a lot of crazy stuff going on in New Zealand at the moment by comparison to how calm and sensible things seemed there like a year and a half ago. So, well, again, fingers are crossed that everything results well. Okay, so now after a lot of talking, I'm going to be reading, and it's sort of everything that we're reading tonight is, I think, probably going to be all Paul Jonas, especially since I've cut into the reading time a bit. But anyway, what I'm going to explain is very quickly what's going on, which is that Paul Jonas has escaped from the Looking Glass world, where he was being menaced by the Red Queen and the Jabberwock. And while he still doesn't know what's happening to him, why he seems to be moving from place to place and from one crazy location to another, he's at least, kind of figured out he has to keep himself alive. And he has taken the boy Galley, who was one of the Oyster House, he was the only surviving Oyster House boy, or Oyster House child, or whatever they were called. The Oyster House boys, I think. He's the only survivor from that. And so Galley has gone along with Paul, and they have wound up in the middle of a river in a strange and unusual place. They are on an island in the middle of this river, and they are watching as a boat of mixed, both sort of inhuman looking and human, more or less looking people have gotten out of this boat and are coming ashore onto this little temple island. And that's where they are, and that's what's happening. I'm going to go back a couple of paragraphs just to put you in the mode here. After a brief look around, they seemed unusually alert for such a large armed group on such a small island, Paul thought. Those who had debarked turned and signaled to their companions on board. Paul leaned forward for a better view through the leaves. When the occupant of the cabin stepped out, he almost fell from his perch. She was almost as tall as the soldiers and stunningly beautiful, despite what, even by moonlight, seemed an odd azure cast to her skin. She kept her large eyes downcast, but showed a hint of defiance in the set of her shoulders and neck. Her mass of dark hair was swept up and held by a crown of glinting jewels. Most astonishingly of all, translucent wings trailed from her shoulders, paper-thin but colored like stained glass, flaring in the moonlight as she stepped from the confining cabin. But it was something else that had startled him. He knew her. Paul could not say where or when he had seen her before, but he knew this woman. The recognition as swift and complete as if he had seen his own face reflected in a looking glass. He did not know her name or anything about her, but he knew her, and knew that somehow she was dear to him. Galley's small hand reached out to steady him. He took a deep breath and felt that he might weep. She stepped down from the barge's high platform onto the gangplank that the bestial sailors had put in place, then walked slowly down onto the island itself. Her dress was constructed of countless filmy strands which surrounded her like a fog, leaving her long legs and slender torso no more than shadows. The soldiers followed her closely as though to protect her, but Paul thought he saw a reluctance in her movements that suggested the sharp blades were meant to spur her rather than protect her. She stopped and knelt before the pyramid for a long moment, then got up slowly and started along the tiled path toward the building in which Paul and Galley had slept. A thin man in a robe had followed her down from the boat and now walked a few paces behind her. Paul was so fascinated by the grace of her movements by the strange familiarity of her face, that she was directly beneath him before he realized that these visitors would see that he and Galley had eaten the offerings in the little temple. What would happen when they discovered it? There was nowhere to hide effectively on an island this small. He may have breathed a little louder at this sudden fear, or it might have been some sense other than hearing that drew her glance. But as the dark-haired woman passed beneath, she looked up into the leaves and saw him. Their eyes met for only an instant, but Paul felt himself touched and recognized. Then she cast her eyes down again, giving no indication that she had been doing anything but gazing up at the night sky. Paul held his breath as the man in the robe and more soldiers passed beneath, but none of them looked up. As the company reached the grassy mound, Paul clambered down the tree as quietly as he could, then caught Galley as he jumped down. He was leading the boy through the trees toward the water's edge when a sudden shout of anger rose from the temple. The soldiers and the robed man knew there had been thieves on their sacred island. Already Paul could hear the rattle of footsteps in the grove. He lifted Galley and eased him down into the water, then slid in beside him. The soldiers were calling to each other, and some, still remaining on the boat, were hurrying down the gangplank to aid in the search. Galley clung to the island's rocky verge. Paul moved closer to whisper in his ear. The boy nodded and struck out, swimming toward the barge. Paul followed, trying to stay as low in the water and make as little noise as possible. Two soldiers were loitering in the stern, leaning on their spears as they watched their fellows search the island. Galley and Paul silently eased past them toward the barge's far side, where they would be shielded from view by the boat's own bulk. Paul found a handhold in the intricate carvings near the waterline, and Galley clung to his shirt. Together they bobbed in the shadows, bumping gently against the hull, and waited. The searchers at last began to return. Paul wondered whether they should try to regain the island, but the sound of the woman's voice as she reboarded decided him. He tightened his hold on the carvings and on Galley as the barge was pushed away from the island. For a moment he wondered at his own blitheness that he should commit himself and the boy to waters where only hours before they had been attacked by some unknown monster. Had seeing the woman clouded his judgment? He only knew he could not simply let her float away. Galley seemed calmly trusting, but that did not make Paul feel any less of a betrayer. The night was very dark, and the disconcerting pair of moons were still the brightest things in the sky. The barge moved slowly but steadily against the weak current. It was not difficult for Paul to maintain his grip, but it was a tiring position. He reached down to unfasten his belt and realized for the first time that he was wearing something different than when he had first gone into the river. His memories were disturbingly vague. He and the boy had escaped from the 8 Squared, fleeing both a woman in red and some other, even more frightening threat, but he could remember little more. Surely he had been in some terrible war, but hadn't that been somewhere else? And what had he been wearing before, that he should be so certain now that this was different? He was wearing baggy pants and a sort of leather waistcoat with no shirt beneath it. He could not remember having anything on his feet when he had first reached the island, and he was certainly barefooted now. He did have a long belt, though, which wrapped twice around his waist. He dismissed all the other questions as unanswerable, removed the belt, and looped it through a piece of filigree just above the barge's waterline. When it was secured, he dropped it over Galley's head and beneath the boy's arms, then stretched the loop wide and slid himself in behind the boy, his back pressed against the hull. Now they were both held securely, and Paul could at last let his tired muscles go limp. The barge pushed on, surging minutely as the oars pulled. Paul felt like a strand of kelp tugged back and forth by the warm waters, with Galley's head bumping gently against his throat. The gentle pressure of the waves nudged him into sleep. He was startled awake by a tingling that seemed to sweep through his entire body. as he floundered in his makeshift harness, trying to sweep away whatever stinging things had attacked him. The purple sky abruptly blazed a harsh green, and the water went a flat, coppery orange. The air crackled with static electricity. Half the watercourse suddenly rose as though some huge thing had surged up from the bottom, but the other half did not, even as the displacement lasted into its third and fourth second. There was even a firm and delineated edge between the two halves, as though the water were something solid as stone. Well, that's interesting. My light went off. Don't know why that happened. We'll see. It's telling me I'm out of power on the light. That's interesting. Well, it may go again, and if so, I'll just read in the dark. Where were we? Yeah, that's going to go off again. Okay, well, such is life. A moment later, there was even a firm and delineated edge between the two halves, as though the water were something as solid as stone. A moment later, the tingling ran through Paul even more sharply, and he cried out. Gally, newly awakened and frightened, shouted also. The sky twisted again, glowing ghastly white for a single instant. Then the painful tingling stopped. The sky flickered back to normal, and the water was all of a piece again, with no waves or even ripples to mark the change. Paul gaped at nothing, staring into the near darkness. He had trouble remembering things, but he felt quite certain he had never seen a body of water behave in that way before. In fact, he realized it had been more than just the watercourse. The entire world had seemed to twist for a moment, to distort grossly, as though it were all painted on a single piece of paper, and that piece of paper had been violently crumpled. What was that? Gally struggled for breath. What happened? I don't know. I think... Even as he struggled for an explanation, the entire section of carving from which he and the boy hung ripped free from the side of the boat, and they were suddenly floundering in open water. Paul grabbed for Gally, and when he had him safe, he helped him to the piece of carved trim, which was spinning slowly in the water a few yards away. The section that had broken off was longer than Paul was tall, and buoyant enough to give them something to cling to, which was just as well. The barge, ignorant of its lost stowaways, was swiftly pulling away down the watercourse. Within a few score of heartbeats, it had disappeared into the mist and early morning darkness. They were alone again. Shh, Paul told Gally, who was crying between watery coughs. The boy looked up at him with reddened eyes. We'll be all right. See, we're just going to float here. No, I'm not. I was dreaming. I dreamed Bay was under the water, down on the sand at the bottom. He was lonely, see, and he wanted me to come down and play with him. Paul squinted, trying to locate the shore. If it were close enough, they could swim despite the quiet but steady drag of the current. But if the land was close enough to reach, it was hidden by mist and dim light. Who did? He asked, distracted. Bay! I dreamed about Bay! And who was that? Gally stared wide-eyed. My brother! You met him! Don't you remember? Paul could think of nothing to say. They had clung to the bit of wreckage for some time. The sky had begun to lighten, but Paul was growing steadily more weary, and feared he would not be able to hold on to the carving, and Gally, for much longer. He was contemplating which direction he should choose for an all-or-nothing swim when a long shadow came slipping toward them through the mist. It was a boat. Not a large one like the ceremonial barge, but a modest fishing skiff. A single shape stood in the bow. As the boat drew closer, Paul saw that its occupant was one of the snouted creatures. The creature backed water with its single long paddle so that the skiff stopped a few yards away from them. It crouched down in the bow, and tipped its head to one side, examining them. Crooked fangs protruded from the long muzzle, but an undeniable intelligence gleamed in its yellow eyes. The sunlight showed Paul for the first time that the shiny skin was faintly greenish. After a moment it stood and raised the paddle as though to strike them. "Leave us alone!" Paul splashed frantically until he could put the bulk of the floating carving between them and the snouted thing. The creature did not swing the paddle, but stood looking at them for a moment. Then it lowered the flat blade until it touched the water a few inches from Paul's hand. It lifted one of its own clawed, faintly frog-like paws from the handle and made an unmistakable gesture. "Take it. Take it." Paul did not feel very trusting, but he also realized that holding one end of the paddle improved his defensive position enormously. He reached out and grabbed it. The creature began to draw the paddle back through the water, bracing itself in the bow so that their weight would not overbalance it. When they were close enough, Paul lifted Galley into the small boat, then dragged himself over the side, keeping a close eye on their rescuer as he did so. The creature said something in a voice that sounded more like duck gabble than anything else. Paul stared, then shook his head. "We do not speak your language." "What is he?" asked Galley. Paul shook his head again. The stranger abruptly bent over and delved into a wide leather sack that lay in the bottom of the boat. Paul tensed and drew himself upright. The creature stood, its bright eyes and long face suggesting satisfaction, and held out its hands. In each was a length of leather thong with a large polished bead hung on it. The beads were creamily reflective, like silvery pearls. When Paul and Galley only stared, the creature bent and picked up a third beaded thong and tied it around its own neck, allowing the bead to rest in the hollow of its throat. Paul thought he saw the bead shimmer for a moment, then change color, taking on something of the greenish tinge of the creature's skin. "Now you do it," the creature said. There was still a slight quack to its voice, but it was otherwise perfectly comprehensible. "Hurry now. The sun will be up soon. We must not be caught on the great canal outside our appointed time." Paul and Galley donned their thongs. The bead grew warm against Paul's throat. After a moment, it began to feel like a part of him. "What are you called?" the creature asked them. "I am Kluru of the Fisher people." I'm Paul, and this is Galley." "And you are both of the Telari." "Telari?" "Certainly." Kluru seemed very certain. "You are Telari, just as I am Olamari. Look at you. Look at me." Paul shrugged. There was no question that their rescuer was of a different sort than they were. "You said we're on the Great Canal?" Kluru wrinkled his low, dog-like brow. "Of course. Even Telari should know that." We have been in the water a long time." "Ah, and you are not right in your heads." He nodded, satisfied. "Of course. Then you must come and be my guest until you can think properly again." "Thank you. But where are we?" "What a strange question, Telari. You are just outside the mighty city of Taktubim, shining star of the desert." "But where is that? What country? Why are there two moons?" Kluru laughed. "When have there ever not been two moons? Even the humblest Nimbor knows that this is the difference between your world and mine." "My world?" "You must have been badly injured to be so foolish." He shook his head sadly. "You are on Olamar, the fourth world from the sun. I think your people, in their ignorance, call it Mars." Why must we be off the canal before the sun comes up? Kluru kept paddling as he answered, dipping and pulling on first one side of the skiff, then the other.
Because it is the festival season, and during the dark hours the canal is forbidden to all except the barges of the priests. But a poor Nimbor like me, if he has been unlucky in his fishing during the daylight, must sometimes take the risk if he does not wish to starve.
Paul sat up straight. Gally, who was slumped against his knee, protested sleepily. So it was some kind of religious ritual. We climbed ashore onto an island, and then later a boat landed there. They had a woman with them, a dark-haired woman with wings, as strange as that sounds. Is there any way to find out who she is? The bank of the canal was at last coming into view. Paul stared at the ghostly collection of huts, slowly appearing through the mist, waiting, but Kluru did not answer. When he looked up, the self-named Nimbor was staring at him in horror. What? Have I said something wrong?
You have looked on the summer princess, and the Taltors did not slay you?
Paul shook his head. If you mean the soldiers, we hid from them. Bemused by the creature's reaction, he told Kluru how they had stolen a ride on the barge. And that is why we were floating in the water where you found us. What have we done that is so terrible? Kluru made several hand gestures which seemed meant to ward off evil.
Only a Talari, and a mad one at that, would ask such a question. Why do you think the canal is forbidden to anyone below the Taltor class during festival season? So lowly ones do not look on the summer princess and bring bad luck on the festival's rituals. If the rituals fail, the canals will not flood next season, and all the land will remain a desert.
A faint memory, really a reflex, suggested to Paul that once he would have found such a belief ridiculous, but recalling as little as he did of his own past, and immersed in such a strange present, he found it difficult to say that anything was ridiculous. He shrugged. I'm sorry. We didn't know anything. I was only trying to save the boy and myself. Kluru looked down at slumbering Gally, and the grim set of his long muzzle softened a bit.
Yes, but...
He blinked, then looked up at Paul.
I suppose you could not know. Perhaps since you are off-worlders, it will not disturb the ritual.
Paul decided not to mention their gleeful consumption of the temple offerings. Who is she, this summer princess, and why do you know so much about Talari? Are people like us common here?
Not here, not in the Nimbor towns, but there are more than a few in Tuktubim, although mostly they stay in the Sumbar's palace, and a few mad ones roam in the outer deserts looking for only the gods know what. There are occasionally visitors from Vonar as well, the second planet, but they almost never come outside the rainy season.
Kluru was nosing his skiff through an array of small docks that formed a set of channels along the canal's bank. Many of the huts were built directly on the docks. Others, grouped together between the canal and a rising cliff wall, rose in high, ramshackle agglomerations. Most of Kluru's neighbors seemed to be awake and moving, some preparing their boats to go out into the canal, but others just as clearly bringing theirs back in from a night of forbidden foraging. But how about the woman? Paul asked. You called her a princess.
The princess. The summer princess.
He turned down one of the waterways, and Paul's wide view was suddenly blocked by looming walls.
She is of the Vonari, the blue people with wings. Long ago we conquered them, and every year they send one of their noble women as tribute.
Tribute? What does that mean? She has to marry the... what did you call him? The Sumbar?
After a fashion.
Kluru used the long paddle to turn them again, this time through a small water gate into a small enclosed pool surrounded by flimsy wooden walls. He brought the skiff alongside an open doorway, then reached out his long clawed hand and pulled out a rope, which he tied to a loop in the skiff's bow.
"After a fashion," he repeated, "since the Sumbar is the descendant of gods, what she does is marry the gods themselves. At the end of the festival, she is killed, and her body is given to the waters so that the rains will come back."
Kluru stepped out of the boat into the doorway, then turned back and reached his hand to Paul.
"Your face looks very strange. Is your head hurting? All the more reason, then, that you and the child should come and guest with me."
Okay. What are we doing here? Still not quite sure why this thing went off on me suddenly, but let's give it a try again. See if we can get a little light on here. Meanwhile, you can look at my arm. Isn't that exciting? We'll probably have a few minutes of light, but it may go out again because I didn't charge it for very long. I wish I could get it. Maybe I can. Hang on, folks. Don't give up on me. Don't give up on me, baby. We still can. Oh, wait. I see. Okay, I've got to do it this way. Okay. There we go. We may have a thingamajig hanging in the middle of all this, but... okay. There we go. All right, let us continue. Hi. The sun was strong in the middle of the day. At this moment, Kluru was perhaps the only adult resident of Nimbor town not hidden indoors and protected from its rays. He stayed as much in shade as he could, huddling beneath the overhang of the neighboring building, while his Talari guest sat in the middle of the fish-skin roof, reveling in the heat, doing his best to drive away the bone-deep chill of his long immersion. Below, Galley was working off his meal of soup and flatbread in an exuberant game of tag with some of the local children.
"In this way you are mad too," Kluru complained. "Can we not go inside? Much more of this bitter sun and I will be as unbalanced as you."
Of course. Paul stood and followed his host back down the ladder into the shack. I was thinking. He sat himself in the corner of the unfurnished room. Is there nothing that can be done? You said there are others of her people here. Won't they do anything? Kluru shook his long muzzled head in disgust.
"You are still thinking about her? Have you not blasphemed enough by looking at that which should not be seen? As for the Vonari, they honor their ancient treaty. 300 summer princesses, at least, have been offered before her. Why should they balk at one more?"
"But she's..." Paul rubbed his face as though the pressure could drive the haunting memories from his head. I know her, damn it. But I don't remember how."
"You do not know her."
The Nimbor was firm.
"Only the Taltors are allowed to see her. Off-worlders and humble folk like me, never."
"Well, I managed to see her last night, even if it was by accident. Maybe I saw her somewhere else as well, and just can't remember where." He looked up quickly as Galley shrieked outside, but it was a shout of pleasure, not fear. The boy seemed quite at ease with his new Nimbor friends. If he was still grieving for the murdered Oyster House children, he did not show it. "My memory? There's something wrong with it, but I don't think it's recent," Paul said suddenly. "I think there's been a problem for some time."
"Perhaps you did spy on the Summer Princess before, and the gods have punished you. Or perhaps you have some illness, or are under some curse. I do not know enough about Telari to say.
Kluru frowned.
You should speak to some of your own people.
Paul turned. Do you know some?
Have I friends among the Telari? No.
Kluru stood, his knobby joints crackling.
But there will doubtless be off-worlders at the market in Taktubim during this festival season. If you like, I will take you there. First, I must find you some shoes. The boy, too. You will burn your feet like a badly cooked meal otherwise.
I would like to go to the market and to see Taktubim. You said that is where the summer princess is kept, too? Kluru lowered his head and snarled. For a moment he looked quite canine.
Gods! Is there no end to your madness? Forget her!
Paul frowned. I can't. But I will try not to speak of it in front of you.
Or behind me. Or on my left side. Or on my right. Call the boy Tellarman. I have no family, so there is nothing to prevent us going now. Ha! Such freedom is one of the small benefits of being nestless.
He said it with a certain sadness, and Paul realized with a little shame that, despite all Kluru's kindness and hospitality, they had not shown much interest in his life. Born into the Martian underclass, kept in serf-like conditions by the Taltor nobility, Kluru could not have had a very happy time of it.
Paul, look!
Gally shouted from outside, splashing gleefully.
Row threw me in the water, but I'm swimming.
The great city Taktubim stood out of sight on the cliffs above. Yet though it was only a mile or so away, there was no direct route up the hills. Instead, Kluru herded them back into his skiff, and they set out once more along the canal. Paul wondered if the impossibility of a direct approach was meant to reduce the chances of success for a violent uprising among the serfs. As they pulled away from Nimbor town, Paul could finally see the full sweep of the cliffs, which were a deep brownish red in the midday sun. At the top, almost invisible, jutted the prickly tops of a dozen pointed towers, all that was visible of the city. As the cliffs fell away and the skiff circled wide around the perimeter of the hills, the vastness of the red desert became apparent. On either side of the great canal, broken only by distant mountains on one side and the cross-hatching of lesser canals, the sands stretched away as far as he could see, a shifting, softly hissing scarlet ocean. "Are there other cities out there?" Paul asked.
Oh, aye, although it's leagues to the nearest in any direction.
Kluru squinted ahead down the watercourse.
You wouldn't want to go off searching for them, even on canals, without a great deal of preparation. Dangerous lands, fierce animals.
Gally's eyes widened a little. "Like that thing in the water?" he began. Then something buzzed loudly in the sky above them. As he and Paul looked up, the light changed. For a moment the bright yellowish sky turned a sickly bruised green, and the air itself became almost solid around them. Paul blinked. For just a moment the canal and sky had appeared to flow together into one sparkling, granulated whole. Now everything was as it had been. "What was that? It happened when we were on the river last night, too." Kluru was again making vigorous signs against evil.
I do not know. Strange storms. There have been several of them recently. The gods are angry, I suppose, fighting among themselves. If it had not begun some months ago, I would say it was because you broke the festival taboo.
He glowered.
I am certain, however, that you have not improved the gods' mood.
The great canal looped broadly around the hills on which Taktubim sat. As the skiff made its way around the loop toward the peripheral canal which led to the city, Paul stared across the great expanses of cracked, muddy fields on either side. He could understand why the Ulamari held the rain in such reverence. It was hard to believe that anything could make those flat, baked expanses fertile. But Kluru had said that every stalk of grain on Mars was grown, and every herd animal grazed within a few miles of the Great Canal's banks. It was a tiny thread of life running through the vastness of the desert. A year without rain, and half the population might die. The canal was not as busy now as it was just after sunrise, and just before sunset, Kluru had assured them. The heat kept most people indoors. But to Paul it seemed almost choked with boats, large and small. Most were crewed by one or more Nimbors like Kluru, but some carried Taltor soldiers as well, or others in less militaristic dress that Paul guessed were merchants or government officials. Some of these boats were even larger and more spectacular than the priestly barge that had docked at the island, so top-heavy with gilt and ornament, so draped with billowing fabrics, and crammed with heavily bejeweled nobles that it was a wonder they didn't simply sink to the bottom of the canal. He thought the same could be said of some of the grotesquely overdressed Taltor nobles as well. Kluru swung the boat into a smaller canal that doubled back beneath the hills. From this side they could see the city itself, nestled just beneath the crest and looking down on the fan-like array of farms spreading out from the loop of the Great Canal and fed by an intricate system of smaller waterways. Tuktubim stood over them like a crowned emperor, its towers of silver and gold glinting in the midsummer sun. "But how can we get up there in a boat?" asked Galley, staring at the corona of towers.
"You'll see."
Kluru was amused.
"Just keep your eyes rolled up, little sand toad."
The secret was revealed as they reached the first of a series of locks. Dozens more were ranged in tiers above them, each fitted with huge pumping wheels. Even now Paul could see a ship with white sails being lifted up to the highest lock. It looked like a toy, but he knew it must be one of the large flat-bottomed merchant ships, like those whose wakes had set their tiny skiff bobbing on the Great Canal. It took the larger part of the afternoon for the skiff to be lifted up halfway. Nimbors were allowed to bring their boats no higher, and so they left it in a small marina built, paradoxically, on the side of a hill. Kluru led them to the public path, and they began the rest of the ascent. The walk was long, but not arduous. The fish-skin sandals Kluru had found for them turned out to be surprisingly comfortable. They stopped occasionally to drink from the standpipes that dripped into basins by the side of the path, or to rest in the shade of tall stones, great red boulders shot through with streaks of gold and black. Soldiers were waiting at the city gates, but they seemed more interested in observing the show than in asking questions of a Nimbor and a pair of off-worlders. It was a parade worth watching. Nobles in covered golden litters carried by sweating Nimbors, others riding creatures that seemed part horse, part reptile, and almost all of them the same jade green as Kluru. Here and there Paul saw a glimpse of blue flesh or a shimmer of pale feathers in the jostling crowd, and each time he caught his breath, even though he knew it was a false hope. There was little chance the woman he sought would be allowed to walk the noonday streets of Tuktubim. She would be kept somewhere, carefully watched, perhaps in the cluster of towers at the center of the city. Kluru led Paul and Galley through the tall gate pillars of ivory and gold and into a street that seemed almost as wide as the Great Canal itself. On either side, sheltered from the fierce sun by vast striped awnings, all of Tuktubim's population seemed involved in either arguing or bargaining. Most of the activity seemed to consist of a combination of the two. "This is all the market?" asked Paul after they had walked for many minutes. Kluru shook his head.
"This? No, these are just the street vendors. I am taking you to the bazaar, the greatest marketplace on all of Ulamar, or so I am told by those better traveled than I."
He was about to say more, but Paul was suddenly distracted by a voice somewhere behind them shouting in his native language. Kluru's translating necklaces made the Nimbor and other Ulamari seem to be speaking his tongue, but there was a sense of both the original speech and the translation happening at the same time. This new voice, growing louder by the second, was clearly and unequivocally something he could understand without any necklace. "I say! Hold on there, will you?" Paul turned. A startled Galley turned too, suddenly feral as an alley cat, his little fingers extended like claws. A man was running toward them with the easy grace of an athlete. He seemed unquestionably human, and an earthling. "Ah, thank you," he said as he reached them. "I was afraid I'd have to chase after you all the way to the bazaar. Not much joy in this heat, what?" Paul was a little uncertain. He had a reflexive feeling that he should fear recognition or pursuit of any kind, but it was difficult to reconcile that with the stranger's appearance. The smiling newcomer was a tall and handsome young man, blonde-bearded and lithely muscular. He wore an outfit similar to Paul's, except that he had a loose white shirt beneath his waistcoat, and instead of sandals made from canal fish hide, he wore high leather boots. "Say, dashed rude of me just to come belting up to you this way and not introduce myself," the blond man said. "Brummond, Hurley Brummond. Used to be Captain Brummond of Her Majesty's Life Guard, but that was long ago and far away, I suppose. Ah, and here's my friend Professor Bagwalter, caught up at last. Say hello, Bags." He gestured to an older man, also bearded but more formally dressed, who was limping toward them, a frock coat draped over his arm. The new arrival paused before them, panting, removed spectacles, which had been steamed opaque, then took out his handkerchief and wiped at his streaming brow. "Good Lord, Brummond, you have led me a chase." He waited for a few more breaths before continuing. "Pleasure to meet you folks. We saw you go in at the gate." "That's right," said the blond man. "We don't see many of our folk here, and we know pretty near all of them. Still, we didn't chase you just because you were new faces." He laughed. "It's not that boring at the Aries Club." The professor coughed. "I didn't chase them at all. I was trying to keep up with you. And a damn foolish idea, too, in this swelter." Drummond turned back to Paul. "Truth is, for a moment I thought you were an old mate of mine. Billy Kirk, his name was. Kedgery Kirk, we used to call him on account of he was so particular about breakfast. He and I fought together in the Crimea, at Sebastopol, and Balaclava. Fine gunnery man, one of the best. But I saw as soon as I caught up that it wasn't so. Damned remarkable likeness, though." Paul was having trouble keeping up with Brummond's swift, clipped speech. "No, my name is Paul. Paul." He hesitated, as for a moment he felt even his name grow slippery and dubious. "Paul Jonas. This is Galley, and Kluru here, who pulled us out of the Great Canal." "Fine boy," said Brummond, ruffling Galley's hair. The boy scowled. Kluru, who had fallen silent at the man's initial approach, seemed just as happy to be ignored. Professor Bagwalter was looking at Paul speculatively, as though he were an interesting example of some rather arcane scientific effect. "You have a strange accent, Mr. Jonas. Are you Canadian?" Paul stared, caught off balance. I don't think I am." Bagwalter raised a bushy eyebrow at Paul's answer, but Brummond reached out and clasped Paul by the shoulder. His grip was very strong. "Good Lord, Bags, we aren't going to stand here in the blazing sun while you riddle away with some linguistic nonsense of yours, are we? Pay no attention, Jonas. The professor can't listen to the first bluebird of spring without wanting to dissect it. But as long as we've interrupted your day, let us buy you a drink, what? There's a fair to middling saw's house just down that little side street there. We'll get the boy something weaker, eh?" He laughed and squeezed Paul's shoulder companionably. For a moment Paul was afraid something might be pulled loose. "No, better still," Brummond said. "We'll take you to the Aries Club. Do you good, give you a taste of home. Come then, what do you say?" That's fine, Paul replied. And that's where we're going to stop, because it's 3 minutes after, and that's a stopping place. It's always nice when I hit one of those places where there's actually a double paragraph, and I know it's a stoppage. Anyway, so since we are, it's already 8:04. So since we're a little past, I thank you so much. Join me next week, either at the 1 o'clock in the morning California time slot, or this slot, of course, 7 p.m. And as always, a real pleasure to have you here. Take good care of yourselves. Try and do nice things for other people, because God knows other people usually need it. We all do sometimes. And again, be good to yourselves, your family, your friends and neighbors, and I will see you next week, one way or the other. All right. Cheers. Good night. Peace.